Hello, fellow traders. 'Tis I, the Rumpled One. It is Monday, January the 22nd, the year 2018. Pivots. I think I mentioned on last video, somebody is doing pivots, talking about pivots and ghost pivots. And so I thought I would do another video, but I've already done a couple of videos on pivots. So if you search the YouTube channel here, you can find my others. I'm going to try and do I guess a quick overview. I might have to do another part 2, part 3. Let's just see what happens. Okay, but first, money management, risk management. For those just tuning in for the first time, very important, but it's also simple. Okay, pivot point. What is pivot point? Well, you take the previous high, you take the previous low, you take the previous close, usually on daily, but also weekly, monthly. You add those together, and you divide that number by 3. Now, if you're a programmer, this is kind of funny, little side note here. In MT4, programmers know computers multiply faster than they divide. So if you want to say multiply this by 0.33 or 0.333, it's not going to work. You have to multiply it by 0.333333 to get it to work properly. Trust me, it drove me crazy. Anyway, and then so you have the pivot point, and then you also have some resistance levels and you have some support levels. And these, I'm just going to look at these 3 simple formulas. Okay, and of course I use an indicator to get the pivot point. Now I mentioned future pivot points. Well, let's just go back here. This is the previous. If you use the current, you're going to get tomorrow's or the next session's pivot point. So that's why I call it the future pivot. Some people call it ghost pivots. And it can, to me, unless you're talking about the ghost of Christmas future, ghost means that, something died and is now haunting. So to me, something dying means it had to exist first. But anyway, that's just the way my logic works. So, but the main point is we have the pivot. What's the big deal about pivots? Well, supposedly that's what the professional traders use to determine what they want to do. I don't know if that's true or not, because then they also talk about the VWAP, the volume weighted average point. But we're talking about pivots today. So what do we care what they are doing, right? All we care about is increasing our portfolio. That's why we say you got to focus on what you do, your trade. So how do we use the pivot? Well, the first thing to do is you look at your daily open. Here it is. And then you look at your pivot. You want to fade the pivot, meaning you want to trade from the open toward the pivot point till it gets hit. So you see here, it only took it, less than 2 hours to hit the pivot. Okay, and so you see here we're 5 pips below the pivot, 21. So that was 26 pips. Okay, I can do it this way too if I want to. So if you go from the open right here and you go up here, well, 2.58, some rounding, so 25 pips. I mean, if you can bag 25 pips a day, you are on your way to becoming a very profitable trader, especially if you're using higher leverage. So it's just really that simple. You want to trade toward the pivot. Now, in one of the videos, I talked about missed pivots, and so I won't get into that too much, I don't think. But the whole point is that it usually hits the pivot, somewhere about 90% of the time, depending on which pair you're trading. And we're talking, once again, daily pivots. Now, there's also something called the pivot trading plan. Now, if I remember correctly, yeah, here we go. They use the 2-day pivot range relationships. This chart, I'll leave it up for a little bit. I don't even remember where I got this, but they talk about these 2-day pivot relationships. So I looked at this and I just coded it as an indicator, as I want to do. And so it just basically tells me which way I want to trade if I want to use this. And so you can see here, this is a lower value day, so it's bearish. Funny thing is, it's up for the day. So once again, sometimes you take these things with a grain of salt, sometimes you use them. You have to find out if it works for you. Now, there's something called the pivot trading plan. So the daily open was below the pivot point. So price near R1, which is up here, the bias is short. At or near the pivot point, bias is short. So you see here, it got near it and then it went down. Near it, actually was above it and it went down. See, once again, it went down. So and if it's down near S1, you see here it opened closer to S1, the bias is long. So that's something, once again, you can use it maybe as a rule of thumb, maybe as a, what do they call it? Odds enhancer, odds multiplier, something like that. So if you see price near S1, you're going to think bias is long. So you can see here, this is one, the pivot trading plan here. It's telling you one thing. This one might be telling you, sometimes it will confirm, sometimes it will refute. So maybe if these two are in agreement, you've got yourself a nice trade opportunity. Personally, I just do the fade, the pivot fade. And so what I did was I put a bunch of that stuff into the dashboard. Pivot trading plan tells you to pivot fade on the daily, on the weekly, on the monthly, whether or not those pivots have been hit, and how far they are away from being hit. Also with the pivot, it tells you if it's on the daily here, and we're looking at the yen. I guess I needed to move the indicator up a bit. About let's see, chart Y, let's move that, what, 65. Does that get that? Okay, yeah, now we can see it better. So you can see here right now it's crossing the pivot point. There you have it right there. You can see that pivot point fade's been hit, this one's been hit, and the monthly's been hit. So those trades are pretty much off the table. Okay? Like I said, this trading's not difficult, it's simple. You pick one thing, if it works for you, you just keep doing it over and over. Don't look for new things. So as I go through these videos and these different methods, if you've got something that's working, stick with it. You know, focus on the psychology part of my videos. You know, the simple things. You do the basics and you do them over and over and over again. You know, the money management. You know, the let other people do the other things. Don't worry about them. Focus on your plan, your method, your portfolio. And don't worry about what I'm doing, especially what I'm doing. Because so many people ask me, you know, can you show this? Can you show that? And I keep telling them, you know, if I'm out there to make a video catching fish, you know, I'm baiting and all that, and I'm eating a fish, at the end of it, you know, the only thing that you're going to learn from is me maybe teaching you what bait to use for what fish, how to decide when to go fishing, maybe the equipment that I use, and how I use that equipment. See, that's what I'm trying to show you, how to do these things. Because once again, it's not what you trade, it's how you trade it. So that's why it's important to be taught how to do it, as opposed to me showing you, my results. If I show you, here, I take a buy zone trade and I win, that doesn't do anything for you. If I show you I take a buy zone trade and I lose, I mean, what are you looking for? So rather than looking for me to prove something to you, prove it to yourself. I laugh because I've already played that game, over a decade ago. And just no matter what, somebody's not going to be satisfied. So that's not my point. That's why I say take what I say or what anybody says with a grain of salt. Test it for yourself. And if it works, add it to your toolbox. If it doesn't, then just, don't use it. It's just that simple. In fact, I'll give a shout out to my buddy J Nell. He doesn't trade. He's one of the preppers, homesteaders out there on YouTube. J Nell 0. Nice guy, good guy. He's over in Ohio in Appalachia. Anyway, he put out a video and he just said, you know what, just be nice. Do something nice. You see, that's what I'm trying to do here. I put out videos to help fellow traders. I try to be nice. I mean, just yesterday, I saw somebody sent me some code and says, hey, can you fix this for me? It'll probably only take you a few seconds. And they were right. They were testing something and they were testing if it was greater than 0. But what they forgot to realize was they're working with MT4 and they were working with the indicator buffers, and the buffers are loaded with a funny number which they refer to as the empty value, and he wasn't testing for the empty value, so his alert kept going off because the empty value is greater than 0. So I fixed the code, but for some strange reason he didn't leave his email address. So anyway, I know I'm way off of the pivot talk, but that's okay too. And here we go. This pivot indicator, I modified the SDK pivots. I put it out in the MT4 motherload, which you can download for free when Kreslik.com comes back up. Anyway, it has the pivot lines in it too, but they also have something called the BC and TC, which is around the pivot point, and what those are, let's see, are right here. It basically uses the midpoint as an offset. So you've got a midpoint, you got the pivot, and then you have the pivot minus that distance, the BC plus the pivot. So that's top channel, bottom channel markers is basically here. So you can see these markers. I have them right there in the orange color. Sometimes they're really close together, sometimes they're not. The SDK pivots, I like it because it puts the lines if you want to go back and look at those from previous days. And then also I added the future pivot right there. So and I also have the dashboard to tell you the distance or the values for the pivots and how far the close is away from the pivot. And I did the real-time price analyzer so you know what the percentage, historically, what the percentages are that price, in this case, high is greater than the R1 PP, which is a mid pivot, or close greater than the PP, less than PP, the percentages. And that will end it. It's not what you trade, it's how you trade it. TheRumpledOne.